Oh, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the new edition of the Bystander Intervention and Self-Protection Training. My name is Andy Shi, and I'm the Executive Director of CPAC. Tonight's webinar is being simultaneously translated into Chinese. If you want to listen to the Chinese translation, at the bottom of the screen, there is an interpretation icon. You can click in and click on the Chinese channel. 各位大家晚上好，欢迎来参加加拿大中国专业人士协会举办的新的一期的反对种族歧视的训练。你如果想听中文翻译的话，在屏幕的下面右边有一个地球的符号，点击进去之后，你就可以选择中文频道。如果你想听得很安静的话，再点击一下下面那个 Mute Original Audio， 就可以听得很清楚了。Our speaker today is Courtney Mangus from the San Francisco Bay Area Office of CARE, which stands for the Council on American-Islamic Relations. And Courtney is extremely experienced in providing this type of training. We invited her a few weeks ago to do the same training. It was so well received, so we decided to do a second time. And with a little modification, we're going to add a little bit more content on responding to racist harassment. So for those who were not here for the first time, you will get everything we did the last time and a little bit more. So this is the 11th time we're doing this series, and we have 2 more to come. And today's topic is on bystander intervention and self-protection. Without further ado, I want to give all the time to Courtney. Take it over, Courtney.
Yeah, thank you, Andy, and thank you everyone for having me. Let me just share my screen really quick and we will jump in. Thank you everyone for being here today at this Bystander Intervention training. And we're gonna jump right in. I wanna start off by giving credit to the Montgomery County Civil Rights Coalition for creating the original Bystander Intervention training. We used that and then we eventually revised it after a couple of years of using it to modify it for our community. And we've been using this over the last year or so. We've trained thousands of people in this training. And give you a little bit of background about CARE. For those of you who are less familiar, we are a nonprofit civil rights and advocacy group. We're the nation's largest civil liberties group for the Muslim community with over 30 offices nationwide. And our office in the Bay Area is the oldest office. And since 1994, we have been working to uphold the civil rights of American Muslims and all Muslims and to foster a better understanding of Islamic faith and its followers and to find avenues for Muslims to be more actively involved in broader society. And so the core of our work is that we provide free, confidential, and culturally competent legal assistance to people who are affected by a variety of discrimination, hate crimes, hate incidents, harassment, etc. We've also recently started doing immigration services, and we also do lobbying, advocacy, youth empowerment programs, and we are a voice for the media. So we're really proud of the work that we do at CARE, but it's important to consider why we have to do this work at all. And this is because that there are overarching structural aspects to how society is organized and operates that oppresses and exploits various groups of people. And this affects a lot of different people in different communities, and it's something that we've been seeing in our communities since forever, but it got worse after the previous election. And it's something that we've been noticing, and I know all of you have been noticing in the Asian community after the COVID pandemic. So these are problems that affect a lot of communities. And so the tools that we're gonna learn today are gonna help you regardless of who's being affected. So jumping right in, today we are going to learn how to handle it when you witness something like this happening, a hate crime or a hate incident, and to practice putting our principles into action so that we can feel really comfortable to step up and engage in nonviolent de-escalation in a variety of real-life situations. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover the values that underline this training, and then we're going to walk through a series of steps that you can use to intervene. And we're going to talk about ways to secondarily intervene, such as collecting evidence. And then next we'll talk about some real life situations, and I will walk through different scenarios and we'll apply those steps and principles to those specific scenarios. So that's a lot to cover, but I think that we're going to be able to do it. And I just want to note here that we'll talk about this later, but I want to hammer home that this training does not teach you how to deal with situations of immediate danger. So if a situation becomes dangerous, our recommendation is for you to leave as quickly as possible with as many people as possible. And I also encourage you to take additional self-defense classes if that's something that you want to learn. Yep. So the values that underline this training are really important to talk about because the reality is that one training is not going to be enough to cover every single possible scenario. And oftentimes in the heat of the moment, it's difficult to remember every single little detail of the training. So you can use your own critical thinking guided by these values, and that should help you stay on the right track for your intervention, even if you modify the individual steps. Okay, so the first value that underlines this training is safety. And so de-escalation is the safest way to respond. There are a lot of unknown factors involved with intervening when you see a hate crime or a hate incident, and you don't know what a stranger is capable of, and that's why de-escalation is the safest option. It's also important to be aware of how your intervention affects everyone's safety. We're going to keep coming back to this point. So throughout this training, we're going to discuss various choices that you can make and the different repercussions that they might have. And in the heat of the moment, it's always important when you're thinking of making a certain decision to think about the repercussions that it has on everyone's safety. Next, another value is that practicing this skill helps us get past this hesitation so we can act when necessary. So we're not getting to do this hands-on practice because we're doing this virtually, but I hope that all of you will take these skills, these steps, and these scenarios and practice them at your house, with your family, whoever you're quarantining with, if you can. The second value that underlines this training is support. So we are there to support what the targeted person wants. And this means that we provide options for the targeted person and we act according to their wishes. So we want to ask the targeted person if they want our help. We ask how we can best help them, and we ask before we touch them. And that's because consent is essential in all things, but especially when intervening to assist the targeted person, because you want to make sure that they're comfortable with the decisions you're making. And we want to shift the focus of the situation to the targeted person by only interacting with them as much as possible and by ignoring the attacker. And we do this because it's most effective and because we believe that the targeted person deserves our attention more than the attacker. So we've done safety and support, and our last value is solidarity. So we believe that nonviolence is the most courageous way to respond. It's easy to lash out, but it's more difficult to hold in your emotions and to act from a principled place. And you may not yet feel that you can do this, but I hope that this training will help you feel more confident too. We are there in solidarity with the targeted person, not as their savior. So although it's our natural inclination to go to the source of the trouble and to try to make it stop, in other words, engage directly with an attacker, we recognize that that is not the most strategic way to respond, and it doesn't necessarily empower the targeted person. So we really want to think about that strategy. And we don't call the targeted person the victim because we want them to retain agency in the situation. So you've already heard me using this targeted person language, But one of the core aspects of this training is that we want the targeted person to retain the ability to decide how they're going to respond and how you should respond. And our goal is to empower the targeted person. Oftentimes, in a situation of a hate crime or hate incident, a targeted person doesn't have the power to control the situation. They don't decide whether or not it escalates or de-escalates or how people help them. So our goal really here is to empower the targeted person and put the power back in their hands. And that's why we're using empowering language. And as we move on, we've covered the values that underline this training. The next thing that we're going to talk about are the steps. But I do want to note that if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A section. I'm not seeing it right now, but we will get to it. So if you have any questions about the values, this is a good time to drop them into the Q&A. Okay, so now we're moving on to the steps. So yeah, so now that we've gotten a little bit of vagueness with the values, we're going to go on to some more concrete steps. And our first step is to assess the situation. And so assessing the situation means being ready to intervene. And this means making sure that you're mentally and emotionally prepared to enter the situation. So if you're having, a bad day and you don't feel like you're going to be able to stay calm, or just for whatever reason, you don't think that you're going to be able to handle the situation, that's a good time to reflect on that and think, maybe I'm not the right person to step in, because if you're not going to be able to stay calm, collected, under control, then you may make the situation worse. Okay, so another important piece here is to be aware of what's happening. So be able to hear and see what's happening around you. That means just like sort of scanning your scene, listening when you're in a public space, so that if you do see escalation of a situation, you're ready to respond. So our next step, one second. Our next step is to get others involved. And so we do this to beat the bystander effect. And the bystander effect is a psychological phenomenon where the more people that are present to witness any event, the less likely any of them will be to step in and help. And this is because we disperse our responsibility onto the people around us. So, in a more relatable scenario, you can imagine that if I were like in a hallway and I dropped a bunch of books and there was hundreds of people around, probably no one's going to stop and help me pick up my books. Everyone else is thinking either they don't care or someone else will do it, or there's other people around. Why am I responsible? But if I was alone with someone and I dropped something, it's more likely that that person's going to help because they see that you're alone and then the only one there that can help you. But you can help people. You can help return people's responsibility to them by letting them know that they should be acting. So you can simply say, hey, do you see what's happening over there? I think that we should do something. So by simply saying that, the people around you are going to be like, oh, right, I think we should do something. And they're going to have that responsibility returned. So once you've beaten the bystander effect, the next thing you want to do is give the bystander directions for how to intervene. It's important in this moment to take a lead and to give the other bystanders directions. And that's because it's unlikely that you're going to run into other bystanders who have been through a training in de-escalation or bystander intervention, which means even if they want to help, they may not know the best way to do that. So you can simply say, hey, can you stay here and record what's happening? And I'm going to go talk to the targeted person. So that's one way, and not the only way, but one way to safely involve additional bystanders. So now that you've done that, the next step is to intervene calmly. So this is when you're going to come up to the targeted person. You're going to introduce yourself and quietly explain that you saw what was happening and you would like to provide support. Okay, so it's really important in this moment to be aware of your tone and your body language as you move closer to the targeted person so they don't perceive you as a threat. Sorry. It's best to come in at eye level with a calm tone. And when you're introducing yourself, it's really the best to be straightforward and say something like, hey, my name's Courtney. I saw what was happening and I want to be here to support you. Can I sit down next to you? I've seen other trainings where they recommend that someone comes up with an excuse of something to say, like, oh, hey, do you remember me from the library? And then if they don't actually know you, that can actually create a lot of confusion on the targeted person, where they're going to have to do some mental labor to figure out what's going on in the situation. So honestly, it's best to just be as straightforward, clear, and quick as possible, so they know who you are and what your intentions are quickly, so they can make like a decision. You don't want to like confuse them in the heat of the moment. So now you're going to ask permission before doing anything. So if the person says that they're fine and they don't want your support, you can move back, but monitor the situation. So you can let that targeted person know that you're going to be nearby in case they change their mind. So you don't have to feel that like you're completely backing out and you're not providing any support. So if I came up to the targeted person and I said, hey, my name's Courtney, I see what's happening here, and I want to be here to support you. Is it okay if I sit down next to you? And they said, no, I want to be left alone. I can say, okay, I understand. And let's say we're on a bus, because that's the situation here. Let's say we're on a bus and I say, okay, I understand. I'm going to be over on that seat back there in case you change your mind. You can come find me, or, you know, whatever. So at that point, you're giving them that option, and you can stay around and check and monitor the situation and see if it continues to escalate. And then you may decide to take a video or check back in with them. So once you've intervened calmly, the next thing you're going to do is ignore the attacker. So basically, you're going to have a conversation with the targeted person and just ignore the attacker. You're going to do this even if they escalate verbally. And that's because we believe that ignoring an attacker has the greatest chance of de-escalating a situation. But I want to note that it's not guaranteed, okay? Sometimes it's just the facts that people have a bad intention, and they have an intention to do harm, and they come into a situation with an intention to do harm, and nothing you're going to do is going to dissuade that. So it's important to evaluate whether or not the attacker is escalating or de-escalating, so you can think of alternative solutions, okay? Ignoring the attacker will usually de-escalate an attacker if they were just, you know, if they didn't plan this ahead of time. But if it doesn't work, keep an eye out, watch the attacker, and see if they're not de-escalating, then you're going to start thinking about exit strategies. So a little tip here is when you're talking to a targeted person, you're not looking at the attacker, you're not making eye contact, you're not talking to the attacker. And what should happen is the attacker should de-escalate, and that should mean that their voice gets softer and they move further away and they talk less frequently, okay? So like, let's say they were saying something hateful, like, you don't belong here, you need to go back home, and then we're ignoring them, and they'll be like, these people, it might sound something like that, where they kind of don't know what else to say, they start moving away. That's what de-escalation looks like. Escalation is gonna get louder, more in your face, closer, and more words. So if someone's escalating, they're gonna get in your face, they're gonna start getting louder and louder. If you see that happening, even though you're ignoring an attacker, it may be that they're not choosing to de-escalate. They're not gonna let it happen. So you should think about exit routes. So this is why it's important to be aware of their placement and exit routes. Because you want to be able to see them somewhere in their periphery in case they start to escalate. This may be a good time to consider asking the targeted person if they would like to leave the scene with you. So you can say to them, hey, I don't think that this person is calming down. Would you be okay if we moved to a different seat or got off this bus and got on another one? So in this scenario, I gave that person 2 options. That allows them to have choice, but doesn't overwhelm them with too many. I recommend 2 or 3 choices. Now that you've ignored the attacker, either the attacker has de-escalated and is moving away, or the attacker hasn't de-escalated and you've asked the targeted person to leave with you. At this point, you're going to continue to support the targeted person. So continue speaking with the targeted person. this is a great time to let them know that they can report their incident. So I think, so a lot of different places have reporting. You can report your incidents to report on Act to End Racism .ca, I think, is the option that was given to me. If someone could put that in the chat, or I'll do it later on, that'll be good. That's where you can report. Yeah, and so you're also going to make sure that they get to their destination safely. So you don't want to say like, oh, okay, well, you're good now, right? Bye. You want to make sure that they get to their next place safely. You can offer to walk with them or help them get transportation. Okay, now we've gone through all the steps. So first, again, we are assessing the situation. We're ready to step in, mentally and emotionally prepared, and we're monitoring. And then I see a situation developing. Now I'm going to get other people involved. I'm going to say, hey, do you see what's happening over there? I think that we should do something. Could you take a video while I go talk to the targeted person? Then they're over there taking their video. And then I move over to the targeted person and I say, hey, my name's Courtney. I see what's happening here and I want to be here to support you. Is it okay if I sit down next to you? And, you know, if they say yes, then I'm going to continue talking with them about really anything. How are you doing? Are you okay? How's your day been? How's your week been besides this? You know, just to try to distract them and de-escalate the attacker. And then we're going to keep our eye out to see if the attacker is escalating. If they de-escalate and leave, we're going to continue to support the targeted person. Now, we're going to talk about ways to secondarily intervene. So one way to secondarily intervene is by capturing video and audio evidence of an incident. And this can be important because seeking legal remedies after the incident. So, and then taking video or audio can be something that you do if it's difficult for you to get to the targeted person, or it can be something that another bystander can do. Okay, so quickly, this is not a Know Your Rights training, but I want to quickly go over what I know about the legality of collecting evidence in public. So in the United States, it's legal to capture pictures of people in public, but it's not legal in all states to collect audio of people in public. You should find out what it is in your area. But if you, if you're a resident of California, it's legal to collect audio evidence of people without their consent, only if they don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy. So that's if they're like shouting across the bus, right? Or across an area, they're yelling. But the law may be different in your region, so figure out what that is. So quickly to think about the ramifications. Again, going back to the values, I mentioned that it's important always to think about the decisions that we make and then the ramifications that they have. So obviously, recording a scene could go a couple different ways. Sometimes it may bring a bad situation to a rapid end. Maybe the attacker doesn't want this evidence coming to light, and they don't want this behavior on camera. So maybe it'll stop them from what they're doing. But you should also be aware that it could escalate the situation if the attacker feels threatened or, you know, caught on camera, if they become angry about it. They may try to grab the phone, you know, or do something like that, or become more escalated. So it's important to monitor their behavior. And then if it becomes dangerous, put your phone away, hide it, or go audio only by putting it in your pocket. What I will say about taking video is that it's really important to do it in a way that you're not trying to interact with the attacker. Okay, because like I said, your role here is to ignore the attacker. And that doesn't mean that you should be in their face with a phone, right? Because that's not ignoring them, that's passively, aggressively engaging with them. So if I'm recording like up in someone's face this close, even if I'm not looking at them and I'm ignoring them, it's kind of like me saying, hey, I got you on camera. And they're gonna be more likely to try to grab that phone or get more aggressive. But if I'm just like really far away and I'm just sort of like, you know, casually taking a video, not really paying attention, the attacker is gonna be more likely to ignore that and not be escalated by it. And then a couple other notes about taking video is that you should keep your phone horizontal because that captures more of the scene, and it's also the orientation of media and television. And I would also say that it's important to know how to just get to your camera quickly. On an iPhone, it's a left swipe. And then on Androids, I think most of the time it's a swipe up. And to have enough space on your device to take videos, because video evidence is really important in these situations. So if you don't have this, like if you don't have the ability to take that, it can really hinder you from being a great ally. Great, so now we're gonna talk about some what if questions. So one of the questions that we often get asked is, should you call the police? And so keep in mind that this training is coming from the United States. I know that most of you or all of you are Canadian, so this may be a different experience for you. You may have different experiences with police, that sort of thing. But in general, we advise people to not immediately call the police unless a situation has become physically violent. And this is because there are many people who feel that the presence of police is a risk of escalation in and of itself. And that can be because they're undocumented and they fear arrest, or it can be because their community's experience with the police has been disrespectful or dangerous. We also recognize that there is a strong element of privilege on the basis of race, class, gender identity, ability status, etc., involved in feeling free to call the police into the situation. We also know that if there wasn't already a firearm present, by calling the police, you've entered a firearm into the situation, which reduces the chances of de-escalation. But essentially, remember this, it's key. We're there to support what the targeted person wants. And that means that the targeted person should get the final say about whether police are called. So if you're thinking that police intervention might be useful, ask the targeted person what they think and then follow their lead. They may have a really good reason for that not being the best solution for them personally. Okay, so the next, another what if question that we often get asked is, what if the bad situation involves police misconduct? So again, not totally sure of the Canadian laws. In the United States, it's legal in all states to record the actions of the police, and they can't ask you to stop recording, delete your recording, or hand over your phone. But they may, and we recommend using this ACLU mobile justice app, but I'm gonna speed past that because I don't think that applies in Canada. Okay, so another question that we often get asked, I'm gonna go back here. Another question that we often get asked is, what if you're the targeted person, right? So what if you're the person being targeted for this hate crime, this hate incident, or the verbal harassment? So I wanna state up front that this training is specifically for people who are bystanders, who are community members, and they witness a hate crime or hate incident, and they wanna provide support to an ally, and they don't know how to do it. So this training is really to help you be mindful about the ways that you can provide support without intruding or stepping on the wishes of the person being targeted. But if you're the person being targeted, you really have a choice for how you react. It's up to you how you're going to respond to your own oppression and your own target, right? People target you, it's up to you how you respond to it. Now, using this training, if you like this sort of way of dealing with hate crime and hate incidents, and this is something you want to use as someone who's being targeted, you can ask people to basically support you with these steps, right? So one option that you may have is to check in with someone near you and saying, hey, I really don't want to have to talk to this. I don't want to have to listen to this, and I don't want to have to engage in this and really pay attention to this happening right now. Can you just have a conversation with me so that I can ignore it, so that, you know, I can also just be with someone? And then if you feel that the attacker is escalating and you want to leave, maybe ask that person, like, is it okay if you like walk with me to like down the street or get off the bus or something? So you could ask people to support you. Now, what you should do is if you feel that you're being targeted for, a hate crime or hate incident, look around. If there's people around, the person who's making eye contact with you in a sad way is the person that you want to go to ask for help. That person is like, oh no, what should I do? Should I help? They're confused. They want to help. Go up to that person. Now, I would say that you should consider, it's up to you how you respond, but you should consider the possible ramifications of your choices. So if you decide to directly engage with an attacker, you're going to be more likely to escalate the situation. There's more likely to be direct confrontation. There's more likely to be physical altercation or violence. So consider the ramifications of that. If you can, just try to find support for yourself. Ask for that support. Ask for people to help you get to safer locations. And then you can also lean on authority figures that are nearby that may not be police. So if you were on a bus, it might be a bus driver. If you're in a store, it might be a store manager. So depending on where you are, there may be somebody around who might be able to support you more forcefully. Cool. So, and then I guess the last piece of advice that I would say about being a targeted person is you can use the strategies of the hassle line to learn how to best ignore an attacker. So to give you a little bit of background, the hassle line, which is an activity we do in an in-person bystander training, is a practice that was used during the civil rights movement. And basically you stand in parallel lines and face each other, and one person is an attacker, one person is a target or bystander. And that target or bystander is just ignoring the attacker. So as someone is just yelling, sort of hateful stuff at you, you are not making eye contact, you're not saying anything back, you're ignoring it. And what I tell people to do is imagine that the words are going past you, not at you. Try to look past them, look above them, look beyond them, don't make eye contact with them. And then you can always distract yourself with other stuff, with your phone, with conversations with other people. Great. So now I'm going to go through some scenarios and talk about what we would do in those particular scenarios. So in this first scenario, the situation that we have is, is a very COVID-related situation right now. Like I've said, we've, tragically seen an increase in anti-Asian sentiments since COVID. And that has led to hate crimes and hate incidents. So in this scenario, this is on a bus, like we were just talking about. And we pretty much covered this. So the bus, some things to keep in mind is asking the person to get off the bus and get on a new one, or, to get off and then walk, whatever. Asking to move to another seat, that sort of thing. So logistically, those are some things to consider. Now, another thing to consider that I've specifically seen with like COVID-related hate crimes has sometimes been the use of chemicals like cleaners or like solvents. So be very careful about that. That can be like a very dangerous thing. So if you see a chemical, treat that as like a very dangerous or deadly weapon and create safe distance for yourself and the targeted person. Now the next scenario that we're going to talk about is a man harassing an African-American person on the sidewalk from a car. So in this scenario, the attacker is driving in a car, and the targeted person is walking on the sidewalk. So as a bystander, if you see that happening, you're going to have to be able to catch up with the targeted person, but you don't want to run up on them. You don't want to run up to them because that's going to scare them. So be very mindful about how you do that. And then what I would also say is that there's a lot of things to consider when it comes to cars. So if your attacker's in a car, keep in mind that cars have been used as weapons before. So keep a safe distance between you and the car. But cars can also be obstacles of themselves. If you're on a one-way street and the car is following you and the attacker, you can ask you and the targeted person, you can ask the targeted person, like, are you okay with us just turning around and walking the other direction? And that may be enough to stop an attacker from following you because they don't want to make a U-turn. Now, if they do make a U-turn or they get out of the car, that's an escalation. And you should try to get off the street and in a public place, because that person is going to be more likely to get physically violent. So if someone's like really like running up to you or takes additional measures to follow you, those are all signs that person is going to be more likely to be dangerous. Now, another thing to keep in mind with this scenario is that you're going to need to also get additional evidence, such as the license plate and the make and model of the car. Just like you would need to collect, video evidence, every situation may require different types of evidence. Great. So in the next scenario, this is a person harassing a Latinx person who is speaking Spanish with a store clerk. So in this scenario, the attacker and targeted person and bystander are presumably like in a checkout line at a store. So the targeted person's at the front of the line with the cashier, they're speaking Spanish. And then let's say the attacker is behind them and the attacker's mad, like learn how to speak English. We don't speak Spanish here. This happens a lot actually in the United States, at least. And then as a bystander, you see this happening. Now, my advice for you in this moment is to get out of line. Leave your stuff, get out of the line, and then instead of cutting in front of the line, like by passing the attacker, go around to the front, like around the whole row of checkouts to the front where they do the bagging. So you can talk to the targeted person without squeezing past the attacker. And that's also going to mitigate any problems that might happen as you cut in line, because some people, because of the social structure of our society, when you cut in line, people get angry with you. So you may end up making the attacker more angry if you walk past them that way. And then just disregard your stuff, don't get too hung up on the checkout line. And another piece of advice in this particular scenario is you can get a store manager, might be able to help you more with this, and they may be able to engage more directly with the attacker than may be good for you. So you can go up to the manager and ask them like, hey, is it possible for you to like talk to this guy or occupy the attacker or put them in another line so that we can try to get this targeted person out of the store as quickly as possible so that they are safe. Another thing to keep in mind with this store clerk situation is that you never really know how a manager is going to react. So you have to keep that in mind, be prepared, and try to think of solutions to give the manager. Yeah, and then the last point here is that in this situation, there might be a language barrier. So let's say that the targeted person only speaks Spanish and you, as the bystander, does not speak Spanish. You do not speak Spanish. If there's a language barrier, regardless of whether it's Spanish or another language, don't let that be a barrier for talking to the targeted person. So a lot can be conveyed without language, by just body language, with gestures. You can convey support and solidarity. So what I would recommend is just going up to them, trying to make conversation, even if you don't really understand each other. And a hand of the heart, a smile, sympathetic eyes is still going to make them feel less alone than if no one came up and talked to them. And then of course you can always use different sort of translation apps and that sort of thing. But if that's not possible, just don't worry about being totally understood and just be there with them. Now, the next scenario that we're going to talk about is a transgender woman stopped while heading into the restaurant, or heading into a bathroom at a restaurant. So in this particular scenario, the targeted person is at a restaurant heading to the bathroom, where the bystanders were at the restaurant as well. Again, you have the option of talking to people who work at the restaurant, like a manager or something. Of course, you don't know if they're going to be helpful, if they're going to provide guidance or support, or they may just like end up kicking everyone out or something. You never know. But in this scenario, I want to say that it's a delicate situation because the bathroom is a private place for a lot of people, if not most people. So you have to be very delicate about going into the restroom or asking someone if they want you to follow them, if they want you to be there. So checking in with the targeted person, like, do you want me to go into the restroom with you? You have to consider a lot of different variables. It might be a single stall or a multi-stall. It might be, you might be of the same gender as the targeted person or of a different gender. So you may be able to go in or not go into the bathroom. Something to keep in mind is the most important piece about this scenario is that although in the other scenarios, I recommended that if a person doesn't de-escalate, if an attacker isn't de-escalating, that you ask the targeted person, is it okay if we leave? Because that person might become violent. In this scenario, my recommendation is at any way possible, try to make sure that the targeted person gets to use the restroom. Because in this scenario, the goal here for the targeted person is just to use the restroom, which is a basic bodily function that they have a right to do. So if they're being stopped while heading into the restroom, asking them to just leave is basically giving in to the attacker. And bystander intervention and de-escalation is not about giving in to an attacker. It's about providing support and solidarity to a targeted person and de-escalating attacker just because of safety, not because we agree with an attacker or anything like that. So if you see someone, if you're in this situation, if at all possible, make sure that the targeted person gets to use the restroom, that they're able to accomplish that goal, and try not to ask them to leave until that happens. Yeah, I think that's my last tip about that scenario. And the last thing that I wanted to say is, since we don't get to practice these in real life, I would really love for all of you to practice these at home if you can. And so I have some ground rules that you should keep in mind if you're gonna practice this with other people. Just use these ground rules. They're gonna make your practice a safer space. So not using offensive terms. So sometimes it can be hard to come up with the terms. If you're role playing, one person plays the attacker and that person has to, say some mean stuff. So in this scenario that you see here in the cartoon where there's a woman who wears hijab like me, something that you can say is, why do you wear that? Take that off, go back home. You don't belong here. So those are some examples that an attacker can say. None of those are offensive terms. It's mean and it's real and it's hurtful, but it's not slang, like it's not slurs and it's not terms that are racial. So avoid those terms, but keep it real. Don't touch each other while you're practicing. And if for whatever reason, if it's hard, feel free to take breaks. And then to not typecast. So you don't need to play people that look like you in scenarios. So if we just did a situation that's a transgender woman, you don't need to play a transgender woman if you are a transgender woman. You should play up different roles, take turns, switch it up. And that's really it. I encourage all of you to do these practices at home. And the other thing that I will say is that I want to put my contact information down in case anyone wants to contact me. Oh, we have a question. I'm moving on to Q&A now.
Okay, thank you, Courtney. There is a Q&A icon at the bottom screen. So if you do have a question, please just type in. You can type in English or Chinese and we'll get some answers for your question. So we do have a little time for Q&A, so feel free to type in your questions.
Yeah, this first question says, be aware of their placement. Does the word placement mean place or location? Yeah, so it's kind of both. So it's like their placement in relation to you. So like you want to know where they're at. So when you're not paying attention to attacker, you should still just know where they are. Like you should, like if they're here, you should know that they're here. So just like, if they're here, let's say I don't want to turn my back like that, because then I can't see them. I don't know where they are. So if they decide to get violent, I won't see it happen. But if they're there, then I might look this way so I can sort of see where they're placed, if that makes sense.
Now, currently, is there any situation where that you would advise confronting the attacker?
Yeah. In these scenarios, when we're talking about strangers who we don't know on the street, and they're targeting other strangers who we don't know, I wouldn't say that that's like going to be a good idea. You really don't know what these people are capable of. And the reason that this training happened was born out of, in case you don't know, this training was born out of a situation that happened in Portland, Oregon, in 2016 or 2017. I'm not sure now. But a situation that happened where a woman, like women that were Muslim, were targeted on a bus, and then two men stepped up to confront the attacker, and they were both killed. So you have to be very careful when it comes to engaging with an attacker, because they might be extremely violent. So I would just say be careful with that. Now, when it comes to people that you know, you might have a different situation. So when we're talking about like people that you know, people that you work with, if it's a microaggression, if you have a position of power in a place, that might be a different situation where you might be able to address an attacker, and it may not be as risky for you or anyone else. So it really depends on the situation. But when you don't know the risk, it's best to be safe.
Yeah, I guess the Canadian situation is a little bit different in many places. What I see is often in the bus or in the store, actually, there are usually several people speak out against the harasser, and then the target feels supported. Actually, it's a kind of escalation, but the argument shifted between the supporters and the attacker.
Yeah.
It does provide help, but it usually doesn't de-escalate the situation.
Yeah, that happens here too as well. Like sometimes a whole group of people will rally and they'll be like, stop talking to them, like leave them alone, you know, and you'll see those videos of it. A couple of things to keep in mind when that does happen is that, again, it doesn't always de-escalate the situation. It usually just creates like a larger argument. But another risk is that it can fall back on other people. So like if you end up confronting the attacker, what has happened before is that person is then arrested or something like that, because then they are blamed for the altercation altogether because they engaged with the attacker, or because, you know, for whatever reason, if that bystander maybe engaged with the attacker, that bystander ended up getting violent or physical. So there are still some risk. And the other thing that I would mention here is that there are times where it works, and especially if you have more than one person. So like if one person talks to the attacker and one person talks to the targeted person, that usually works out better than just talking to the attacker, right? Because then someone is still supporting the targeted person and still with them, so they're not alone. And then somebody else is trying to get the attacker away. And this works really well if you have two people who are trained in this skill, where basically they both come up at the same time. One person talks to the target person like, hey, are you okay? I want to talk to you, brings them that way. And then someone goes up to the attacker and is like, hey, I know how you're feeling. I understand you. And just tries to calm them down and walks the opposite way, just to create distance and like safety. And that sometimes works.
So that's the next level of training, right?
Mm-hmm,
to intervene in a more proactive way to actually further distance the two people. Now, you a minute ago you used the term microaggression. Can you explain to people what that means?
Yeah, so a microaggression is basically a minute instance of bias, and it can be an action, or it can be like, you know, a sentence, or it can be something you say or do, but it communicates inferiority or dominance, bias, racism, that sort of thing. So one way, you know, that it might look up, like it might come up for people is like, oh, your English is so good. That's a microaggression. if you speak English natively. You know, like there's ways that might actually be a compliment, but there's a lot of times where they're assuming that you don't speak English. So that is a microaggression because they're assuming that you're, you know, of a certain way and then are surprised that it isn't that way. You know, something of the lines of like, oh, I would never hire those people or something. So that's a microaggression. It's racist, it's against a group of people, but it's more minute. And a lot of times we see that happening more often than hate crimes or hate incidents. And they usually happen by people that we know and work with or see or in our family. And it's a little bit easier to engage with those people. So I have more questions here. Do the attackers know that they're doing a crime? That I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's in an attacker's mind, but oftentimes it's not a crime here. Like just verbalizing things are not usually crimes. We don't have like a hate crime reporting option in like our legal fields. It's something that's like been worked on. I don't totally understand the logistics of it, but they're not reported as correctly as they should be and actually tracked as hate crimes. Usually they're only reported if they get up to the level of violence, physical violence, and they become an assault, or if they rise to the level of like stalking or harassment and they happen repeatedly. So a one-off situation usually isn't gonna lead to any sort of charges. If they are doing a crime, then why are they, okay, yeah, I don't.
So just for people's information, next week, next Monday on November 16th, we're actually doing another webinar by a police officer from the York Region Police. He's helping with the hate crime unit. So ever since COVID-19, York Region Police have increased their hate crime unit staff, and he will be talking about a hate incident and hate crime. So I welcome everyone to come back for that one, so you'll get a very good understanding of anything about hate crime, hate incident, how to report, why you should report, and plus many tips about personal safety and property safety and break-in prevention. So that will be the 16th, next Monday. And then on the 18th, next Wednesday, we'll be doing one on school bullying. And that will be done by Canada's best research and resource place, that's in Kingston, Queen's University. A professor and her PhD student will be doing that webinar. And they have done it many times, very useful seminar on bullying. So come back for that one. Anyway, so let's go back to the questions.
So we have a question that says, do we need to be concerned that taking a video could escalate the situation? Yes. Be aware that that can happen and assess the situation. Try to stand far away from the attacker when you take your video or photos, and do so in a way that isn't confrontational. And then if you see that it gets dangerous, put your phone away or hide it. And then another question that says, many cases I saw where people attacked did not speak English well, did not even trust people around, even who wants to help them or her. They may refuse to be helped by the police or to come to the court to face the attacker. What should we as bystanders do? Well, really, it's up to a person on how they engage with this. They may not trust the legal system or the people around because of the situations that they're experiencing, and they may be very fearful. So I would say, continue offering support, like say, I want to be here to support you. Offer it. And if they say no, that's totally within their rights. That's their choice to not get your support, and respect that. And, it's also their right to not go to the court and report it and all that. All you can do is offer your support and provide it when it's wanted.
All right.
We have one more. Do you have a real example showing your tips which can help on some harassment situations? Other than the situations that we went over with the African American, the Asian, Latinx. I don't know if you mean aside from those or if we should go back to them, but we went over some scenarios. So if you mean specifically maybe microaggressions, I will tell you that we are releasing a new training very soon that's specifically around microaggressions. So if you're interested in it, you know, reach out to me. It's a brand new training that's basically born out of the same question that we often get in this training, which is like, how do we deal with those?
Yeah, now we have a couple of minutes left. Do you have any final thought you want to offer to people on bystander intervention or self-protection?
Yeah, I'll just kind of go back to my my earlier points again, which are if you are the person that's being targeted, it's totally within your right to choose how to respond to that attack. You have the right to respond to your own oppression in the way that makes sense for you and is right for you. My advice is that if this type of intervention feels right for you and this is what you want to happen when you are targeted, then reach out to people when it's happening. So if you are being targeted, try to find that sympathetic eye near you. If someone's looking like, oh no, what do I do? How can I help that person? Reach out to that person and say like, hey, I really don't want to have to like focus on what this person's saying. Is it okay if I just have a conversation with you so I can ignore that? And then if, you know, if the situation is still dangerous and you want to leave, ask that person like, can you walk with me over here? Because I don't want to be alone and I want to leave. So asking for that support in the same way that we are offering it, you can ask for it when you're a targeted person. Yeah, that's my last advice.
Right, so I'll just share a slide. If you could stop your share now of the reporting, please, in Canada. Here. So if you do see any racist harassment or attack or anything you want to report, if it's a hate crime, you can report to the police, but you can also report everything here. This website is called acttoendracism.ca. ACT stands for Asian Canadians Together to End Racism. This is the organization. It's actually a coalition that was formed in April this year in response to the COVID-19 related racism. And the coalition have about 50 organizations across Canada. So there is a report line here, report a racist incident. You can do texting to this number. You can report in so many languages, English, French, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, and Tagalog. So you can type, you can text, you can do all sort of things to report the crime. And it's very important for you to report because Asian Canadians typically are very low on reporting. There was an estimation, it's about 10%, I think. So if you do not report, people don't know it's happening. We in Canada, there are still people in the government and the media and actually are not accepting that there are so many racist extents to the Asian community. So it's important to report, get into the statistics and let the police to know. And so we'll draw the attention of the media, the government, and the society. Only when people are aware of these incidents can they change their minds and take precautionary measures. So I do encourage people, if you have anything, go there to report. With that, I think we are on 1 minute to 9 o'clock. So I want to thank Courtney for a very informative and useful webinar. And I want to thank you for attending. If you have any other questions, feel free to email to us, but do come back next week. This recording will be stored when we do some editing in a couple of weeks. We'll send a link to everyone attending this or registered for this, so you can replay it and look at it for a second or third time. So you will receive this link for this content, or even share it with your friends. So with that, I want to wish everyone a good night and I look forward to seeing you again. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you, everyone.